Easter, so we're starting to see the change in the weather, and we're seeing flowers start to bloom. So that's always a lovely thing. But alas, COVID. So we'll be praying for all of our listeners as we begin this segment today. For those of you joining us for the first time, I am the internationally accredited journalist, and that also includes accreditation to the Holy See. I am the Rome correspondent for Newsmax, and you can also find me on National Catholic Register, the Epoch Times, which we'll be discussing today. I hold a BA in History from Christendom College and a Master's in Foreign Policy and Diplomacy from the prestigious Norwich University. And my co-host and I both are veterans of the military. I from the United States Navy, and Joey Meugniot from the Army National Guard. Joey, tell us a little bit about yourself before we begin today.
Good morning, or good day, wherever you may be. Thanks for sticking around after Catholic Drive Time. My name's Joey Meugniot. I'm a political advisor, small business consultant, and an analyst supporting the Department of Defense. And as Bree said, I'm an Army veteran with 2 tours to Afghanistan. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm excited to give you my analysis and comments on the topics that we've picked out for today. And Bree is going to do, as she always does very well, kick us off with some breaking news.
Right. So today we're going to be talking about all things China, since we've had quite an interesting week last week with regards to whether it's our Secretary of State in the United States or breaking news coming out of Italy today. But our show is broken down into 3 themes: news impacting faith, connecting that news to news impacting culture, and then focused on news impacting current events and politics. So crossing faith, culture, and current events. This is intersections. And so today we're going to be talking about, like I said, China. But before we begin, I want to start off with some lighter notes. First, I want to talk a little bit about what happened this morning, which was the Vatican Secretary of State I think it was like a week and a half ago, issued a directive saying that all private masses, whether it was Novus Ordo, Eastern Rite, traditional Latin Mass, all private masses that take place in St. Peter's Basilica were no more. They were no longer being permitted to be said outside specific times in St. Peter's. That's 0700 in the morning, 7:30. I think there was an 8 o'clock and a 9 o'clock. But it's listed, and I put it up on my Twitter account. Please do follow me at Bree A. Dail, not .com, but I also have a .com as well. But at Bree A. Dail, and I have that as well as the translation in English. But what's really interesting is that we have still, for a week and a half, been pinging the press office to give us a reason why this took place. Why did they decide to just go ahead and ban all private masses? It used to be that priests who work in the Vatican, priests who are able to go, to school here for like a master's degree or a PhD, could in the morning go and say their morning masses at St. Peter's in one of the side altars. And you had the ability to go and meet them at the sacristy at, say, 7 a.m. in the morning, right when the doors open, and go to Mass in the morning. It was lovely. And I live right by St. Peter's, so it was one of the things I love to do. And one of the sections back behind the baldacchino traditionally was the traditional Latin Mass at the St. Michael, the Archangel side altar. And Joey, what's really sad is that with this Vatican decree, again, no one knows the reason why. The press office hasn't responded to any of the inquiries that we've sent. It's now shut that down completely, except private masses now in the Novus Ordo are no longer taking place. Instead, they're going to be set at 2 altars, one the choir chapel in St. Peter's, which is behind a grill. And I took a picture of that this morning, or at the foot of the altar of the chair, like right at the Bernini's, classic chair altar behind the baldacchino. But you actually have to go downstairs and go into the Clementine Chapel to attend the traditional Latin Mass. And I was able to do that this morning. So, Adrian, if you can, our producer's going to throw up for those of us, for those of you who are watching and not just listening to our radio show here at Intersections. He's going to throw up a video that I made this morning very quickly of people being able to go and how to get to the traditional Latin Mass. So, Joey, you've been to St. Peter's before. Did you know that there was and you're Catholic, so that's great. But did you know that there were 7 a.m. masses that could be said or be heard, or you could attend a 7 a.m. mass if you wanted to, or 8 or 9 a.m. mass at St. Peter's? Did you know that every day?
I didn't until I lived here and you and I started working together more closely. I did not know that. And it's interesting to have choices. And that's one of the things that I find curious about this is the lack of choice. No, I didn't know that. I didn't realize how many times that Catholics could go to Mass at the Vatican specifically, like within St. Peter's. I had always seen it just kind of from an outsider's perspective. I didn't realize how many side chapels and areas there were to hold Mass and how many people actually use them every single day until I lived here. Right, so it's been an interesting experience just being so close to kind of the center of Catholicism in the Western world, and seeing how how people in Italy or people in Rome interact with their faith, interact with St. Peter's. And I know you had an experience this morning. So how did that go? Tell me about it. Tell me a little bit more about it. I'm curious.
Yeah,
I'm seeing the video for the first time.
Yeah, so this is the video that I took this morning for those of you who are watching. For those who are not watching and just listening to us in the radio, no problem. You can find us up on Facebook. I'll put it out on Twitter later as well, the entire show that we're doing today. But then you can also go and see the video that I created this morning as well. It's pinned to my Twitter feed. But really, it was beautiful. There was nothing really different to being able to go and attend traditional Latin Mass, except we were able to go into this beautiful small chapel that's underneath the Baldacchino in St. Peter's. It is the closest chapel to where the bones of St. Peter traditionally were. So it's one of those things that you are not really able to get into this small chapel unless you would take the scavi tours, like the excavations under St. Peter's oftentimes, or if you made a reservation months and months and months in advance. Now, here's the thing. I was just myself and 3 other people this morning, but what happens when the borders start to open up again and we start to see people coming in pilgrimages? Is this going to stand? And the question was raised by both Cardinal Burke and Cardinal Mueller on the legality of this, because priests are not, it's within canon law, the law of the church, to say that priests are not permitted to be like held against their will to not being able to say Mass. And this decree has caused them to not be able to say Mass when they could. And it's coming out of the Vatican. This is not coming from, say a civil authority here. This is coming from the Vatican. And so we are still waiting, Joey, on the press office, and we are still pinging the press office on giving us an answer, because this isn't going to go away. And I think it is going to make things a lot more difficult.
Yeah, and with thinking with that in mind, right? Last week, the Vatican put out a press release about marriage that many people have talked about. I was not nearly as blown away by this revelation as other people might be, and so they were attacked. The Vatican was attacked from one side of the aisle, if you will, and now you've got a week, like now, this is kind of the implementation of this letter that they put out a week or 10 days ago or so. And now you're seeing the Vatican kind of be questioned the same way from the opposite side of the aisle. So the Vatican's having an interesting week, in my mind. They're not quite, I don't know if they don't have their messaging quite put together, or they don't have, but there's a lot of questions being asked from people that don't typically agree with one another on different issues and different areas. And the press office is silent.
Right.
Why?
And it is an assessment that for those who are Vaticanistas here, I'm still a fairly new Vaticanista, but it does seem to be the assessment that this was just not communicated to the press office at all. This directive came directly out of the Secretariat of State, and we don't even really know who signed for it. I mean, we have assessments. We think we know who did, but all of this needs sunlight and clarity, because this is dealing with people's faith as well. This is really hitting to the heart of people's belief, if they're not able to pray every day, and that's what really makes us different as Catholics, we have the opportunity to go and pray in service, for those who are not Catholic, going into a service and pray every day, praise and worship every day. And we believe truly that Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist. So we are able to go and see him every day if we wish. And to be able to do that is a gift. And not everybody has the freedom to do that, especially, say, in China, which we're going to be talking about soon. So it is a question, it is a question that needs to be answered, I think, because it is really hitting to the heart of freedom of worship here. Now, on an aside, Joey, I have to give a tip of the hat to a friend of ours, Karen Rotham, who is a well-known tour guide here in Rome, but she's also an adherent to the traditional Latin Mass. She goes to San Trinita here in Rome, which is the parish for the traditional Latin Mass, and she has single-handedly this Lent arranged for the traditional Latin Mass to be said at most of the station churches in Rome. And for people to understand, there's a tradition, a well-loved tradition, of being able to hit specific churches, ancient churches throughout the city of Rome. And I'm going to have Adrian throw up some pictures.
Until I moved here was that how many churches there are, and all of them are stunningly beautiful. Like, take your breath away, stunningly beautiful. Like, it doesn't matter if you go into the smallest church, tucked in a side street, off, somewhere in Rome. If you walk in, you will be blown away. Period. Full stop. So it's amazing to me that some of these things still exist. They still there. And in a time in the United States when they're ripping out art and destroying art from churches and whitewashing a lot of the beauty that the church has to offer when it comes to art and sculptures, it is a breath of fresh air to go to literally any church you pick in Rome and walk in and see some of the most amazing artwork, some of the oldest artwork that you can find, whether it's in Trastevere or if you walk around the different areas of Rome. It's quite amazing. Also, what I think is quite amazing, and we will have to talk about that when we come back.
When we're back, we're going to be talking about, we'll hold that thought, Joey, and when we get back, we'll be talking more about the beauty in the churches here. This is Intersections, Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events. We look forward to talking and seeing you on a return.
Whenever morality comes up in discussions, some atheists argue the behavior patterns we call morality are merely the product of evolution, naturally selected for the survival of our species. But is this true? The answer is no, and here are some reasons why. First, if it were true God didn't exist and our moral behaviors were merely the product of evolution, well then the dictates of our evolved nature wouldn't express the will of a being beyond man. As such, there would be nothing to morally bind man's will and thus no moral obligation. Second, what if the behaviors we judge now as wrong, such as rape and murder, become beneficial for our species in the future? According to the atheistic evolutionary account, they would have to be morally acceptable. But these conclusions are absurd. Moral obligation does exist, and rape and murder will always be wrong. Therefore, evolution is not sufficient to explain morality. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Your Odyssey begins at the University of Dallas, the premier Catholic liberal arts university in Texas. With campuses in Irving and Italy, UD's rigorous core curriculum sets it apart. An education rooted in the great works of Catholic and Western tradition. An education that ennobles and enables students in the pursuit of wisdom, truth, and virtue. Undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs are available. Start your college odyssey at the University of Dallas today. Go to udallas.edu to learn more.
Good morning. You are listening to Guadalupe Radio Network. This is Bree Dail for Intersections, Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events. I am joined by my ever intrepid co-host, Joey Meugniot, and he had, on the first hour, we were discussing the beauty of the churches, and he had one more thought that he wanted to add to this, so I'm going to throw it back to Joey.
Hey, thanks. Sorry, I for those of you that watch Catholic Drive Time, I basically just had to Joe McLean myself off the radio. So I apologize for that. So I never cut myself off before, but here we're learning new things together here. So the last thing I wanted to say was about the organization of what you started to talk about in the first place. And I think it's important that people realize there are things you can do. There are things that you can figure out how to work with your community and people that you that think the same way you do, or might want to do or be interested in the same things that you're interested in. And this is a great example of doing something like that. Karen was interested in doing this. She set it up for everyone else. You can do that too. I'll touch on this a little bit later when it comes to one of our other topics, but you can do things. There are things you can do to help push forward your ideas or connect with other people. Anyway, and that's the other thought I was in the middle of saying, is that this is a great example of that, and I absolutely love it. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, tip of the hat to Kieran, and I just have to say it was, welcomed, but there were some pushback, and, you get that in faith sometimes. But if you don't take the positive steps to actually engage with people, you're never going to get it done. And that might mean like sitting down with people you may not appreciate or like, and coming to an agreement. And Kieran was really able to do that. And I have to tell you, to just hit on a point before we move on, one of the most beautiful things that brought me back to the Catholic Church, and one day we'll talk about like our faith journeys, both you and I, but one of the things that really brought me back to the Catholic faith was the beauty and the music. I read one time that the church is intrinsically incarnational. And for those people to really understand what I mean there is, Christ, who was God, became man, took on the human nature, took on flesh. And he divinizes us. And when you walk inside a church, a Catholic church, it's the reason why we have the statues and the art, and even on the ceilings, the art. It's always what's lovely about coming into a Catholic church in Italy is that it doesn't matter how distracted you are at Mass, which, let's all be honest, we do get distracted at Mass. Unless you're like a super saint and you're in ecstasy, you're going to get distracted in Mass. In Rome, you can look up and still be taught the church, the truth, the faith. Some facet of the mysteries of Christ's life, of a saint's life, it's going to be there in the art, and that's what makes it very fleshy and incarnational. And even the music, it's supposed to be there to bring you in and to lift you up into that higher place in prayer. So that's all that we experience when we go into a church, and a church like St. Peter's Basilica, to kind of circle back. A church like St. Peter's Basilica should be there for us to be able to praise and worship the entire time, throughout the day, not just simply in the morning, not just to walk around and take pictures. It is meant to be used for the intention, which is for prayer, for the Mass, which is why there are so many side altars in these churches. And I think it is really quite a travesty that we're not able to have all the Masses being said. One of the things, Joey, before we go on to talk about China, after Mass, after I attended a traditional Latin Mass, another priest came in right afterwards to say traditional Latin Mass at the Clementine Chapel, and that was lovely. I saw two priests this morning doing that. I'm guessing there were all four spots were filled. But when I went upstairs, again, to the main basilica, and I saw the Mass being said at the altar of the chair and Mass being prepared for at the chapel of the choir chapel, there were only two priests celebrating at the Mass at the chair. Usually at 7 o'clock in the morning, you'll see about 20, 30 priests coming out of the sacristy, if not more, saying Mass at the different altars, to the point where the altars were being filled, and it was just like one priest after another after another. So it is a really sad thing to note that so few Masses were being said this morning, and I think that should be understood. Also, only the Roman Rite is being said, whether it's traditional Latin Mass or the Novus Ordo, the regular Roman Rite is being said. What about the Eastern churches? What about the Byzantine Rite or Malachite Rite or these other rites? They're not being permitted to say Mass at all at St. Peter's now. So that's something that if you want to be involved, you should be getting involved by petitioning the Holy Father to open up the churches again. And we'll provide a link to how to contact Pope Francis, but I think he would be willing to hear it from others. So let's hope for that. But moving forward, we've got a massive, massive story to break today. And this actually connects to the Vatican because, the ongoing Sino-Vatican deal, the deal with China, has always been kind of in the background. What did the Vatican get from this? How is this impacting people of faith? Well, today I broke a story with Epoch Times, and you can go to Epoch Times right now and read it. It's horrific. This story should make every single person listening, every single person watching, want to call their senators and call their congressmen this week, because Facebook and big tech will be testifying on the Hill this week in talking about disinformation and what they've been doing in censorship. But meanwhile, per my investigation and my report, Facebook has been making money off of ads coming from China, CCP-owned companies that are selling the hair of the Uyghurs as extensions and wigs. This should cause people to be outraged. They are targeting Western women in particular. If you go on Facebook right now and you start to search for wigs and real human hair and that kind of thing, when you start searching those keywords, ads will pop up. Over 98% of the revenue that was made this is billions of dollars by Facebook last year, 2020, over 98% of it was made through ad revenues for people buying ads. So this should cause people to ask, what else is Facebook making money off of with regards to persecution, products from genocide like the Uyghurs, products from Christian persecution, from who knows what else? They have a vetting process, Joey. And jump in here because I'm sure you read it this morning. What are your thoughts in this report that I've broken?
Sure. This story highlights the utter hypocrisy and double standards of both the Chinese Communist Party and this kind of big tech oligarchy that seems to control most facets of modern, I would say Western life. I was going to say American, but probably Western life. If you post a meme or make a political statement that Facebook or the media overlords disagree with, right? So they got a warning on Catholic Drive Time for saying something about vaccines that they didn't agree with, right? So if the media overlords disagree with you, you'll be censored or banned. However, if you imprison an ethnic group against their will, put them into re-education camps, shave their heads, then sell that hair to gullible Westerners with your big tech allies, perfectly fine. And I've said this before, and I'll continue to say this again and again and again, but people need to get more involved in this. Bree, you mentioned it a few seconds ago even, but contact your representative, regardless of what party they belong to, regardless of what your political leanings are, and tell them that how you feel about this and to take action on these issues. If an issue that everyone can get behind, regardless of political party, is being anti-genocide, I think this is a pretty good place to start, right? So call them so many times that you're on a first name basis with them, right? Call them that many times, because it's things like this. This is a perfect example of money moving across the Pacific Ocean, billions of dollars moving around based on genocide. And we can't continue to allow this type of behavior. We can't. This has to be, if we're gonna run out of hills to stand on, if we just keep moving on to the next hill. Like, we have to pick something and then fight. And this can be that issue. I'm kind of at a loss for words, because when I read your article, it really put a lot of details to what had been said and what you and I had talked about before this. But this put a lot of details. It put dollar amounts. It put questions out there that people hadn't talked about. And the Trump administration was working on it. Biden administration has kind of dropped the ball a little bit. So this is where people can get involved. You want to get involved? This is where you get involved.
And you can do it this week because, like I said, the Mark Zuckerberg and other members of the large big tech companies are testifying before the House Committee for Energy and Commerce this week, talking specifically about situations like this. Now, they're coming to talk about how they've benefited, the government by censorship and, but there are people who are just learning about this today. Now, I have to say, and in my article I wrote about this, back in August 20th, 2020, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency seized over 13 tons of human hair from western province of Xinjiang. This is where the Uyghurs are. Okay, 13 tons of human hair. And the investigative journalist who was quoted back then said his calculation is that this particular shipment, which it's just one shipment, represents the hair of approximately 90,000 women. I want people to think about that. Where else have we heard about stories where human hair was being sold or used? I don't know, maybe during World War II, during the Shoah, right? And yet the Chinese, they're not selling it to their own people. They might be, but they are targeting Westerners. Westerners are pouring money in to genocide right now. And who is the conduit? It's Facebook. So there is no question here that this is the type of oversight that is needed for these big tech companies. They are making billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. How are they doing that? Joey, people are saying, well, could this be possibly a misunderstanding, something to that effect? If you go and you take a look at the article that I published with Epoch, I have screenshots of one of these many companies, and I believe they're shell companies. I have screenshots of this company admitting openly it is Uyghur hair, admitting it to my sources. And so Joey, I sent some pretty poignant questions to Mark Zuckerberg. I asked him, how long have you had companies selling real human hair products from China? Because we need to know if there was only one shipment containing 13 tons of hair, how much money is that, Joey? How much money? And how long have they been doing that? That was one container. How many containers are sent? I mean, we're thinking 90,000 women, right? How long has your company's policies for ads? They include vetting. If anybody has tried to purchase an ad, I have. They'll reject your ads often reject them. So your company's policies for ads include vetting. Please describe how Facebook's approve and still approves of CCP-owned companies selling products from genocide. How did you do that? How much money has Facebook generated from CCP-owned companies selling real human hair? For transparency, Mark Zuckerberg, because you vet all ads on your site, what other products connected to human rights violations might have been generated, with revenue? They literally came out this past month with this commitment to human rights policy that they plastered all over their site. But we have now connected, like it's incontrovertible evidence. You can absolutely see this. So what else are they making money off of? With this evidence, yeah, go ahead, Joey.
Well, that's a great question. What else? And the money's going to Facebook, and then I'm curious what Facebook's using the money on. We've seen a massive influx of money coming out of Facebook into political parties and different organizations around the United States. That's how this works. They're taking a product it's a part of a human, and they're selling it and then profiting it from it, and then taking that money and doing what with it, right? And it's all part of a much larger problem. And for once in my life, I'm actually at a loss for words. It's kind of
sick.
It's vile and disgusting, and I don't know what else to say about it other than it's vile and disgusting.
And Joey, I said, with this evidence, how could your platform be trusted to self-police and censor information if your company has benefited from horrific human rights violations? I mean, this is ground zero, I think, for both sides of the aisle to really stop and consider what, like you said, what this money is being used for and what else has been, has slipped under the radar. I only knew about this, Joey, because a source here in Italy provided this just by happenstance. And that's sometimes how it happens, where, you get a story because someone said, hey, this seems really weird. And then you give it to a journalist. I am always open for those people who are listening. Contact me through Facebook, contact me through Twitter, contact me. If you think you have a story like this, it is time to start putting some sunlight in some of these dark corners of the world. And it's not just Facebook. It's not just Facebook. We're going to be talking about something that is happening in the Vatican this week, connected to China, we would hope, but a big conference that's going to be taking place and led by the Secretary of State. We have literally seen right now in front of us what is going on for ongoing, genocide, persecution by the CCP. We know that this type of persecution, by the way, has been happening to Christians for decades. So the question is, with all of this evidence in front of us, how can the Vatican still remain silent? And it has. Hong Kong right now, we're seeing this. Most of these companies, by the way, Joey, claim that they are located in Hong Kong. That I find very interesting. On their Facebook page, they say China, but, it's supposed to be two parties, two systems, something to that effect, right? So, or one party, two systems, something to that effect. We know now that China has strong-armed its way into Hong Kong legislation, and they have incarcerated, as we have reported, the majority of the pro-democracy leaders, including Jimmy Lai of Apple Daily, who is the editor-in-chief of the largest pro-democracy media outlet there. I mean, we know that Cardinal Zen is going every day to the prisons to minister, and yet we still we find silence coming out of the Vatican with this. Is this enough to show that there is a pattern of travesty and violations and human rights violations? I mean, we've heard about Myanmar from the Holy Father. Is it time to hear from the Holy Father with regards to Hong Kong and China?
I think that it is. I don't think we will. That's just my hot take. And I'm going to climb up on my soapbox here for a minute about China. So through the frame or through the lens of what we just told you, right? Keep in mind that in Alaska last week, China had the audacity to say that in the United States, that the United States was slaughtering black Americans in the United States. So keep that in mind, that they said that on American soil last week. They had the audacity to say that, while they know very well that they have got re-education camps where they're sterilizing people, they're cutting all their hair off, they're making them learn to worship the communist state. This is what's happening. It's on video. It's not even, they don't even try to hide it. And then we have leaders in our country that say that's just a cultural thing. Not a big deal. That's a cultural thing. It's part of who they are. It's what they're doing. We can't really judge them on it. Yes, I think that we should be bringing light to these things, and I think that we should be talking to them about it. And I think that there's a big issue with China, whether it's culturally or when we look at foreign policy. I think there's two large threats to China, and this is why we talk about them so often. Their largest internal threat is Christianity and the structure and strength of the Roman Catholic Church, and it is a worry for them. And I think externally their largest threat is the United States. And I don't think most Americans understand why we talk about them so much, because when you hear their propaganda that they use to attack the United States, you hear about the things that are going on in Alaska, and that when they lead off a diplomatic meeting in the United States by saying things like African Americans are being slaughtered in the United States, what is their goal? Their goal isn't a dialogue. Their goal isn't anything else other than the constant drive of the Chinese Communist Party and the communist ideology. And that's why the teachings and lessons of the church are in direct confrontation to communist ideology. They will not allow it to flourish, as it would weaken their tyrannical grip on the Chinese people and reduce the power that they have globally. They will not allow these things to happen. They will not allow the United States to speak to them from any moral high ground, and they will not allow Christians within their country. They won't allow Christianity to flourish at all, which is why you have the Synod Vatican deal, and you have them allowed to pick their own bishops, and you have a lot of things, and the Vatican doesn't say anything about it. Why? They are a threat to the Western way of life. That's Joey's opinion. That is my hot take on that. They are a threat to the Western way of life. And you will continue to hear about these things, at least from us here on Intersections, where we talk about these things. And if we're the only ones talking about it, and I can't imagine that we will be, at least you know that you can come here and we will talk about hard-hitting issues and the way that all these different things that might seem unconnected are connected. And China is a big part of what's going on right now when it comes to the United States and Christianity and their persecution of humanity.
Yeah, and I think, Joey, if you take a look, I mentioned Myanmar, for example. With all of the tensions that have been taking place in the violence, did you know the Chinese came out and made a statement that they're going to be involved with the diplomatic negotiations within that country? Did you know that they did that this past week?
No, I did not know that, but I am unsurprised considering they're meeting with Russia this week and have already started attacking the United States in conjunction with Russia. So that's unsurprising to me that they would want to be center stage. Yeah, unsurprising.
It's one of the reasons why I want people to kind of think back to when during the primaries in 2016, when our president, former President Trump, stood up there and was grilled by a journalist during a debate on who the main enemy or threat to the United States was. He was the only one then to say China. Everybody else said Russia. He said China. And now what we're seeing here is not only intellectual theft that has been taking place, for decades, but we're also now seeing them turning our, free enterprise, our capitalist systems against us by printing a whole bunch of money, by flooding the markets, and they have made money. They have made money during this COVID. And oh, by the way, where did COVID come from, Joey?
Well, I think at least after the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but we'll talk about their expansion. We'll talk about other things that are happening with China besides the two stories we've just talked about now. And I think this story gets a little bit deeper and a little bit broader. And every time we talk about a specific area, you're going to realize that there are so many levels and facets to this that it is a massive problem. And former President Trump was right to say that they are the leading threat, not to the United States, but to Western culture, to Western life. And the more we talk about this, the more that people understand what's happening and what's going on, the better off we will be. The more informed you are, the better off you will be, and that's what we're going to continue to talk about. Every single time we're on here, we will drive these points home to you and how you can help and what you can do about it.
Right. You are listening to Intersections with Bree and Joey here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. And, we are going to start to take phone calls soon. And when we start to do that and we start to speak with you, we want people who may disagree with us. We want people to have that free exchange of ideas, because we found ourselves in a position now, especially with the COVID shutdowns, where people don't really speak civilly anymore with one another. You're on Facebook, you're on Twitter, and there's constant tensions and fighting. But, with the stories of the Uyghurs, for example, or the stories of, the Christian persecutions in different countries, including China, this is unitive for either side of the aisle, politically speaking. The question about how to address it may not be, and that's where the conversation has to be had. But we have to come from a place to understand that when we are talking about, women who are being raped and mutilated and their hair being shorn, and then the products of that being sent over to the United States, over to the UK. Joey, what's amazing is that this story was taken by Lord David Alton, who has been a leading voice in the UK against genocide and against Christian persecution and genocide of all kinds. And Lord Alton has taken this story and presented it to the Prime Minister this morning. He is going to be talking about it on the floor of the House of Lords. It's going to be presented in the House of Commons. This is something that needs to be sent to every single senator, every single congressman in the Hill. We have got to start to prosecute these types of human rights violations in the United States. When we return, we're going to be talking about China. Again, this is Intersections with Joey and Bree, where faith, culture, and politics meet. We'll be back right after this break.
Are Christians guilty of hate speech for voicing their belief that homosexual acts are immoral and contrary to human nature? Many in the culture think so. So what can we say in response? First, it's not hate speech to say a particular behavior is inappropriate human behavior given our nature as human beings. If that were true, well then any negative moral evaluation of behavior would be hate speech. But that's absurd. Second, the assertion is inconsistent with itself. Why can't Christians have a negative moral evaluation of homosexual behavior, but yet the objector can negatively judge a Christian's behavior for opposing homosexuality? Isn't he guilty of the very thing he accuses Christians of? My friends, it's not hate speech to say a particular behavior is not befitting of human beings. We must judge actions, but always with respect for the person. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Access to clean water is something we often take for granted. When we turn on a faucet, out pours clean water that's safe for drinking. But that's not true in countries like Kenya, where the number one cause of child mortality is from drinking contaminated water. Together, we can change that. Cross Catholic Outreach works with local Catholic partners around the world to transform the lives of families living in poverty. Join this mission at crosscatholic.org/bless.
Good morning from Rome. This is Intersections with Bree and Joey, where faith, culture, and current events meet. You're listening to us on the Guadalupe Radio Network or online. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook, as well as Gab and Maywe and all those types of social media networks. But my Twitter handle is Bree A. Dail, and Joey will share his as well. But we've been talking about China. Joey, go ahead and finish your thoughts, because I know that you had quite a few more on what's going on with China and expansionism.
Well, and I want to talk about this before you flip over to talk about the last topic of the day, which is this interesting conference that's going to happen. And I'm really interested in that, like incredibly interested in that, because I think it's fascinating. But not to bury the lead there. But I think that it's important that people recognize that one of the things I read recently was that The Chinese Navy is now the largest Navy in the world. If you didn't know that, now you know. So not only are they the largest Navy in the world, they're continuing to expand their Navy. They're continuing to make it even larger. What does that mean for the United States? What does that mean for anything? It just means that along their coastal waters, anytime that there would be an area for them to force project, right? And as a naval officer, Bree can talk a whole lot better about naval power and force projection. Kind of a funny thing that I decided to talk about the Navy, but it's fascinating to me to see that and the United States is trying to catch up, right? We're trying to build up our naval power to counter some of the things that China's doing and in their territorial waters as they start to force project down into the Philippines. But you start to see them encroaching in waters that are traditionally Philippine national waters or areas that are reserved for Hong Kong or Taiwan. And you're going to continue to hear about these kinds of stories as they expand their Navy. Just for instance, in 2019, which is a peace year, there wasn't, we didn't fight a world war, and though there's still conflicts going on in the world, we didn't fight a world war. They built more ships in 2019 than we did in all of World War II. Think about that for a second. Now, that's just the Navy. There's a massive buildup of forces, troops, and equipment that the Chinese, what's the People's Liberation Army and Navy, so the plan, People's Liberation Army Navy, are doing and will continue to do to counter anything that the United States does. So when you look at their comments and the things that they're trying to do, they're trying to weaken the U.S. politically from a moral standpoint. They're trying to weaken them from an economic standpoint. All of these things are happening. There's stuff going on in Africa that we don't even have time to talk about today that is crazy. It is, someone in the YouTube comments said, wow, things are so crazy right now. You have no idea how absolutely crazy this is. Just take a second. You start to sound like a crazy person. I feel like a crazy person sometimes when I start to read and think about all these things. I feel like that meme with the little lines and the like, I'm crazy. You're not crazy. This is really happening. And if you just take time to step back, look at all the things that are happening, put it all together, you're like, wow, okay, well, we should probably get our act together.
Right, and we should be reporting that. Right, we should be reporting that. Journalists should be reporting on these things with factual evidence. There's so much to report on. I said this the other day, when it comes to Rome and in the Vatican, there's so much to report on. Not one person can report on it. But why is it that we keep hearing the same stories over and over again? Why are people almost plagiarizing stories? The question has to be, are you hearing news that is informing, or are they trying to inform your opinions for you? And I think most people would say, if you're watching the mainstream media right now, there's a lot of talking heads, not really reporting on things, just talking about their opinions on things. And of course, here we are at an intersections. We are doing a news analysis as well. But, one of the things that I think we have to consider when we are watching what is happening in the world is what we're not hearing. What we're hearing instead. There was a show or a video that came out a few years ago that went viral that showed news organizations repeating the same talking points each time in different outlets. And it was really quite scary to consider that they were all saying the same thing. What are we not hearing? And Joey, we're gonna hit this conference real quick because I think people are really should know about this. And so on the 23rd of March, so that would be tomorrow, starting at 1500 Central Time, the European time, that's 3 p.m. here. So backtrack 5 hours for those of you who are in the States. The Dicastery for the Promotion of Integral Human Development and the Vatican COVID Commission, in collaboration with Strategic Concept for the Removal of Arms and Proliferation, will be hosting an online event. And you can go online and we'll see if we can link to that, because I think more people should be going to this. It is being completely done in English, and it's being headed by none other than Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Secretary of State for the Holy Father. And then we have Cardinal Turkson. Please note that name, Cardinal Peter Turkson. He's a prefect for the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. One of the quick questions I would have, Joey, is, with all of what Cardinal Pietro Parolin has done with regards to the Sino-Vatican deal, He was one of the instruments behind this. He owns it. He wants this legacy. Do you think that Cardinal Parolin has addressed the communist Chinese on the removal of arms and proliferation?
No. I don't think that he has, nor do I think he's going to. It's kind of like a lot of things that are happening. China just gets ignored. So I think that this is a push to talk about, or at least bringing up, non-proliferation and disarmament.
During COVID. Why? Why COVID?
Yeah.
Where's COVID coming into anything with regards to...
Everything's about COVID. So
yeah.
Everything we touch is about COVID. So it's the key to the kingdom. So you get, it's interesting to talk about these things because I just told you that China is building up their military exponential rates. And last week we heard that the United Kingdom wants to increase their nuclear weapon stockpile by 40%. Who's disarming? What's maybe that's why we'll find out. Maybe they're going to talk about it. Maybe I can ask a question. Maybe Bree can ask a question. Maybe anyone listening to this can go ask a question. We deserve answers if that's going to be the church's stance on it. Who's disarming? I mean, as a member of the military, I'm not a big fan of war. But at the same time,
we have to go do it, right? So that's
right. So
people think that we're more warmongers, but no, we don't want to go.
Who's disarming and why? Like, if the West is the only ones disarming, and China's not, that doesn't seem like a recipe for peace, does it? So, I think that the dialogues that are happening between the United States and China are a little concerning, to say the least. I think that there's a lot of things going on that we need to pay more attention to, and with the Vatican stepping into this particular subject now, given the light of everything else that we've talked about today. I just find it very interesting, and I'm excited for it. I will be paying attention. I will be listening. I'll be jotting my little notes down, and maybe we'll talk about it next week or in a couple weeks when we've gathered some more information and put some more thought into it. But this is really interesting. It's nice to talk about these kind of things because we're not talking about something that already happened. You can be a part of it. You want to know how you can be the change you want to see in the world or something? Listen, be active. Go out and get information. Don't wait for somebody else to tell you how to think about it.
Exactly.
I'll give you my opinion on it, and we can give you some analysis and break some news and talk about it, but there is nothing better than getting it firsthand.
Right.
Read the book, watch the speech, talk about it, grab your kids. They can let's do it too. The more information that you have, the better informed you will be. And that's
actually,
kind of the point.
And you're listening to Intersections, and a lot of those who are listening to us right now on the radio are working moms, stay-at-home moms, with kids who are in school, but the school is right now at home because of COVID. Well, since this is all about COVID, maybe have a poli-sci sit down with your kids, a little lesson talking about the United Nations, because this is being sponsored by the United Nations Secretary General and Pope Francis in their call for a global ceasefire, which is all well and good. But the question kids are going to probably ask is how is this at all connected to COVID? And I think that that's going to be one of the questions that are going to be asked by journalists if they're not going to address it directly. But again, it goes back to this whole idea of what China is doing, because China, they are going to do what they want. And they've made it very clear to us, they did this past week, that they will use everything in order to utilize propaganda to push their agenda. And Joey, just before I throw it right back to you, we're getting close to the end of the show. As a naval officer, when I was serving up until 2015, we saw this firsthand. Chinese intellectually stealing our capabilities. They have gone and they've hacked our systems in the military, and some of the major government contractors, and they have stolen intellectual property. For the F-35, for example, the design was stolen by from Lockheed Martin, not the super secret squirrel stuff inside, but the design was. It was actually a story that was overlooked that Barack Obama, when he went to China, they unveiled their version of the F-35 when he was there on the ground in China. So the Chinese have been expanding their territorial waters into a major waterway for commerce by literally building an island in the middle of it, and then claiming that island for themselves. So they are using everything possible right now, and just to go really into it, guys. Those of you who are listening, understand this: the Chinese they don't have a lot of raw materials in China, so they are going to Africa, and they are taking oil from Africa, and they are exploiting the workers there. They are doing genocide against minorities they don't agree with because they don't have enough food to feed them. Okay, so there are weaknesses in China, but the fact that they are building up their military should cause us all concern. Joey.
Hey, I know we're about to wrap up, so please catch us here next week on Monday. Leave us some comments down below if you have thoughts. We read them. We'll check them out. If you're on the radio, go to YouTube, go to Facebook, check out the comments now, and we will continue to drive hard on these particular topics every single week. My name's Joey Meugniot, and Bree can finish us off.
Thank you very much for listening to us. We'll see you next week on Monday. Hit us up on social media. This is Intersections, where faith and culture and current event meets. This is Bree and Joey signing off until next week. God bless.